I got my ratings to 2600 by using these 3 simple steps to find the best move every time. Now, the first step in knowing how to find the best move is knowing how to evaluate a chess position. And the first thing when it comes to evaluation is king safety. The king is the most important piece in chess. It doesn't matter how much material you have, if your king is checkmated, the game is over. But how do you know when the king is safe or unsafe? First of all, we need to be able to see the amount of pawns around the opponent's king. With that being said, do not push pawns on the side that your king is on. The less pawns around the king, the less safer the king is. Another factor that you could use to know when a king is safe is the amount of defensive pieces around the king. So if you look on this position, how many defensive pieces does white have close to the king? And how many defensive pieces does black have close to their king? Another factor that you could use is the amount of attacking power pointing towards the king. For example, how many pieces does white have pointing towards our king? I mean, the bishop is blocked out. This is not pointing towards our king. The knight is blocked out. The queen is blocked out. But if you look on black's position, this bishop is pointing towards the king. The queen is ready to go over to the king. The knight is ready to go over. This rook is ready to lift and go towards the king. And the final thing that you need to know when the king is safe is the amount of weaknesses around the king. A weakness in chess is a pawn or a square that can't be guarded by another pawn. So for example, if there's a square around the king, for example, let's just say this pawn is right here, then this would be a weakness and the light squares would be weak. Everything that I'm about to show you guys is called the Dorfman's method. You can find it in his book called The Method. Also, ensure that you try to guess these as we go along. But in this position, black continued by playing the move rook to c6. Very nice move. When it comes to attacking the opponent's king, you want to ensure that you're able to bring pieces closer to the king. So when it comes to evaluation, ensure that you know when someone's king is safe. How black was able to win this game? Knight f1, rook to g6. The rook is now on the same line as the king. And after queen c2, white is basically trying to bring more pieces over to defend the king, but it's just not going to help. We spoke about finding the best move in chess has a lot to do with looking for moves on the opponent's half of the board. We are going to be talking about that, but queen to h4 was played here. The threat is to immediately take this pawn on h3. White plays bishop to g4. We play knight to f6, and all of a sudden there is this very big attack on white's king. And this was basically how the game continued. Pawn to g3, and if you're able to find a very brilliant move here, then find it, but knight takes g4 was played, sacrificing the queen, knowing that after pawn takes, we're able to play knight takes e3, and this is a check on the opponent's king. He has to react to the move. We take the queen, and then after rook takes, another nice move was played by black, which is pawn to e3, and it's now GG's. The king is in check, and once white reacts to the check, we could either fork or we could either take on f3, and this will lead to a checkmate. Based on what I just said, it's white's turn to play in this position. Try to find the correct continuation. And once you watch the full video, everything is going to be easier, so don't worry about it. And don't be deleting your answers. We're all here to learn. Another thing that you guys need to keep in mind when it comes to evaluating a chess position is piece activity and material. Now, they both go hand in hand. I usually tell my students to do material first, then piece activity. So it's king safety, material, then piece activity. Material basically means the amount of material on the board. You know, you could literally just count the pieces. I'm ahead by a pawn, I'm ahead by 3 points. That's how it works. Now, when it comes to piece activity, it's all about who has more development. What is the quality of each pieces? Like, what are the pieces doing on the board? Here's a very nice example. If you look on the position, black has 1, 2, 3 pieces on the board. White has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces on the board. However, black is slightly better in this position. So it's not just about material. And the reason why black is slightly better here is, for one, king safety. We spoke about this when it comes to evaluating a position. Like once you watch this video, you're going to be able to know exactly what to look for to evaluate the position, then find the best move. So it's black's turn to play in this position. We only have 2 pieces in the attack, but black is able to gain an advantage by playing queen to g1. After the king moves, we simply check the king, forcing the king to move again. And all we need to do from here is capture the rook, take the pawn on d5. Now we're checking checking the king and the bishop. And again, black is just better. Once the king moves out the way, we're going to take this bishop and we have so much more pawns than white. And white does not have a safe king. Now, based on what I just said about piece activity and material, who do you think is better in this position? Everything will be answered throughout the video. So leave your answer in the comment from now. Do not delete your comment once you do. We are all here to learn. Now, the other thing when it comes to evaluating a chess position that we need to be able to look on is pawn structure, pawn weaknesses, and just weaknesses in general. So looking on the pawn structure, you want to be able to be looking for double pawns. You also want to be able to be looking for weaknesses. Now, keep in mind, a weakness in chess is a pawn or a square that can't be guarded by another pawn. So a5, these squares are also located on the fifth or the sixth rank if you're looking in from white. If you're looking in from black, it's on the fourth or the third rank. So a5 is weak, b3 is weak, d6 is weak. And the fact that black has double pawns, those are also weaknesses. Now, when you're evaluating this position, we already spoke about king safety. Both of the king is safe, so you have to look on other factors. When you're looking on material, the material is equal, so you have to look on other factors. Now, when we're looking on piece activity, I'm not gonna lie, this bishop on b7 is not as active, so we could give white an advantage there. But once we start looking for pawn structure, we immediately know that white has the advantage. Knowing how to evaluate a chess position will immediately help you to know what plan to use, where to look for the moves, and it will help you to find the best move. One thing I did not add though is unprotected pieces. If you're able to spot unprotected pieces or a bishop on the same line as the king or the rook on the same line as the queen or the king, those are also stuff that you look for when evaluating a chess position as well. With that being said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to identify all the weaknesses in black's position, type your answer, and let me know how you would continue playing with the white pieces. Everything is going to come full circle once I cover the next three steps, but let me know what you're working with. Now that you know exactly how to evaluate a chess position, all you're going to do when it comes to evaluating, look and ask yourself, whose king is safer? Look on the material and piece activity. Who has more material? Someone could have more material, but their pieces are just less active, and vice versa. After you look on king safety, material, piece activity, ensure that you look on the pawn structures and pawn weaknesses. Just being able to evaluate a position won't help you unless you understand the next step, which is candidate move. Now, I spoke to a student yesterday and they said they don't know what the concept of candidate move is. So let's talk about it. Now, candidate move is basically finding all the moves that you want to play. And then once you find all the moves that you want to play, that's when you do step three. Now, in order to find the candidate move, this is where you first have to ensure that you evaluate the position, and then you want to ensure that you look for all the possible moves on the opponent's half of the board. You want to ensure that you look on all the possible checks on the board, all the possible captures on the board, all the possible threats on the board, and you also want to ensure that you look for all the possible pawn breaks and pawn storms on the board. A lot of persons only say checks, captures, threats, but they miss the part when you could just say put a piece on the opponent's half of the board. Also, if you're not in a very tactical position, like what if you can't check, you can't capture, or you can't create a threat? This is where you know that it's not a dynamic position and it's more of a static position. And if it's a static position, you have to start looking for your long-term plans. And when it comes to planning, you have to think about your pawns and your pawn breaks. With that being said, it's black's turn to play in this position. Hopefully you're able to find it, but let me show you how I would try to find the best move here. The first thing I need to do, I need to evaluate the position. Whose king is safer? First of all, there are pawns around my king, but there are also pawns around white's king. Second of all, I have two pieces protecting my king, plus these two pawns. But white has three pieces guarding the king. Third of all, I have a queen and a bishop ready to attack the opponent's king. And my knight is applying pressure to this weak D pawn, and this knight is the only defender of the weak D pawn. So I have attacking pieces pointing towards his king. He doesn't have attacking pieces pointing towards my king. With that being said, black's king is safer than white's king here. Now, after king safety, let's talk about material and piece activity. Material wise, the position is equal. But from a piece activity perspective, that's how I'm going to give black the advantage. This bishop is active, the queen is active, the knight is applying pressure. This is a weak pawn, by the way. Remember, we spoke about that. This is a weak pawn, a pawn or square that can't be guarded by another pawn. So my knight is playing attacking role, his knight is playing defensive role, his queen is just locked in here, not doing anything, while my queen is doing something. His rook is playing a defensive role. I'm not really sure what this rook is. And by the way, once you start evaluating the position, I want you to try to get clues. So for example, I evaluate the position and I notice that my rook is not as active. So automatically, I'm thinking of a move like rook to c8, which means that's a candidate move. Because his rook is unprotected on a3, I'm automatically thinking about a move like queen to e7. That's a candidate move. However, when it comes to finding the candidate moves, I prefer for you guys to do it in this order. So first thing you do, look on possibilities on the opponent's half of the board. So knight e3, knight a5, bishop coming in, queen coming in. You have to do it like this first. Even if the move looks dubious, it's going to give you ideas. For example, obviously we can't play knight takes e3 here, but it's definitely an idea. We don't have any checks on the opponent's king, so let's start looking for captures. We could take this knight, we could take this pawn, we could take this pawn, but that loses the queen. So that doesn't really help us. With that being said, our candidate moves are bishop takes knight, knight takes pawn, rook c8, queen to e7. But none of that makes sense if you don't know how to choose the right candidate move. And that's where step three comes in. And step three, when it comes to finding the right move in chess, you want to know how to calculate. Now, calculation is basically a muscle. It's like a skill. You have to train it. So I want you guys to do what I just showed you in this video. I want you to take some positions, or if you're one of my students, ask me for some positions and I'll send them to you. But here's how I'm going to calculate here. If I take the knight, the king takes the knight, I do not have any immediate forcing moves after that. So I don't necessarily like this move. If I take this pawn, the knight takes, I don't get anything. If I take this, the rook takes, and I don't get anything. Now, the two moves that makes the most sense is actually rook to c8 and queen to e7. Whenever you have two moves that makes a lot of sense, always try to play the one that is more forcing. So for example, rook to c8, it has a lot to do with piece activity. My rook is not really doing well. Rooks needs files. We need to put a rook on the open file. However, queen to e7 is a forcing move. And the reason why this is a forcing move is because it immediately x-rays the opponent's rook. And with that being said, if white just absolutely just don't do anything and said, hey, play another move, we're going to play a move like knight takes e4, a discovered attack on the opponent's rook. But let's just say white sees that we're trying to do a discovered attack and move his rook out the way. This is called a drawback mistake. Notice how he moves away his rook. Now it's no longer guarding the pawn. And this is the reason why if you do this in the right order and do it over and over, you're going to be able to do it quicker and quicker. It's like that quote Bruce Lee said, it's like, if you want to learn a punch, you don't just immediately try to do it quickly. You have to do it slow, do it step by step. So I'm not expecting you guys to go play your 10-minute games and you're like, okay, step one, evaluate, step two, find candidate moves. That's not how it works. You have to train it first. And once you train it, maybe it takes you 10 minutes to really go through one, but you keep on training it, it's going to take you 5 minutes. And if you train it again, it's going to take you 2 minutes. And eventually, you're going to be able to play chess like me, where I'm able to play, decent level chess, playing even bullet games, and I'm still playing the best moves. Because at the level that I am, I'm able to evaluate, calculate, find candidate moves. I can do this in seconds. Now that the rook is no longer guarding the pawn, now bishop takes e1 becomes a good move. This is called removing the guard. We're going to take the knight. It really doesn't matter how white decides to take back the bishop. We're going to take on d3, and just like that, we're winning the game. In order to find the best move in chess, you have to know how to evaluate, look for candidate moves, and calculate. This is your final exercise. Try to find the best move. Put your answer in the comments. Now we're going to be answering everything that you already solved. Let's go. Moment of truth. Now, this is the first position that I wanted you guys to solve. Let's solve it together using the Dorfman's method. Now, the first step is to evaluate the position. So let's talk about king safety. Whose king do you think is safer? White's king or black's king? Definitely white's king. I mean, the pawn has only moved once, but black moved two pawns. Black has two attacking powers pointing towards our king, but our knight just stops everything. While we have a rook, we have a knight that could, well, we can't really move the knight, that would be mate, but in some lines, and we have a queen. So Black's king is definitely in danger here. And I want you guys to keep something in mind. If king safety is ever an issue in either side, then nothing else matters. So we're not even going to look on anything else. I'm not going to check the activity or the material. I'm not going to check the pawn structure. I'm not going to check anything else because if your king is checkmated, you lose the game. With that being said, we already evaluated the position. Now we need to think of candidate moves to win the game. The first thing that we want to do is look for moves on the opponent's half of the board. So a rook going here or here, that just loses the rook. We could take here. We can't move the knight here because of mate. We can't really move the queen. We could play rook to f4 to apply pressure on f7. With that being said, we need to bring more pieces in the game. If any one of you guys found this, just let me know in the comments. I'm going to personally send you a cookie to your address. White in this position, this is the game of the century, I think, or Nigel's immortal game. He actually played the move king to h2. And even after king to h2, I know that you guys are still not sure what the idea is, but we're bringing more pieces in the game. And maybe we needed to check piece activity because this plan wouldn't have worked if black's pieces were active. I want you guys to notice that there's not really much that the queen could do. We're actually going to checkmate the black king with the white king. This is called a king walk. So in this position, I think his opponent played rook to c8 and then he played king to g3. His opponent put the rook back on e8 and then he played king to f4. And then his opponent was like, what is this guy doing? Okay, let me attack his rook. Did he move the rook? The guy was like, nah, king to g5. And if he dares to touch the rook, king to h6, and that's going to be a checkmate. However, his opponent saw what was happening now and decided to play king to h7. I'm going to give you guys some time to pause the video and try to find a checkmate in 5 moves. But white in this position plays the move queen takes g6. Pin pieces does not protect. The king now has to move out the way. And then after queen to f6 check, king g8, king h6, there's nothing that black could do to prevent a checkmate. There are other ways to do the mate. For example, we could check here. We could put the queen here. We could also check here. And if the king moves, that's a mate. If takes king back, king h6, and that's also going to be a checkmate. Okay, here's the other example that I ask you guys to solve. Let's start by evaluating the position. Let's talk about king safety. It's opposite side castle, so it could be a crazy game. Black has not moved any pawns on the side that the king is on. White has not moved any pawns on the side that the king is on. However, black is pointing pieces towards white's king. The rook is coming in. This knight is coming in. The pawns could also come in. And maybe white could play moves like pawn to a5, pawn to g6. That's an idea. With that being said, I think black's king is slightly safer than white's king here. Let's talk about material and piece activity. From a material perspective, the position is equal, but from a piece activity perspective, something is happening. What we need to do is we need to compare the pieces. First of all, whose queen is more active? Whose rooks are more active? The rook is more active. Well, this rook is not more active than this rook, and this rook are both bad. That's a bad bishop. That's a good bishop. That's a good knight because it could go there. So when it comes to piece activity, I would say without the move that white is about to play, black, it's about equal. It's about equal. So let's keep going. Let's talk about pawn structure and weaknesses. What is a weakness in chess? A pawn or square that can't be guarded by another pawn. With that being said, what are the weaknesses in black position? D6 cannot be guarded by another pawn. D5 cannot be guarded by another pawn. B6, C6, A5. So black has more weaknesses than white in this position. What's the best move in this position? We have to look for the moves that is on the opponent's half of the board. Those are the moves on the opponent's half of the board. There's also a pawn break with pawn to f4, and these are the candidate moves. And in order to choose which one is better, this is where we're going to start our calculation. With that being said, white did a grand master trade, which is bishop takes b6. This is what I hear Maurice Ashley calls it because he's like, if you're a beginner, never give up your bishops for a knight. It's a grandmaster alone who is allowed to do that. But anyways, the reason why we're giving up our bishop for the knight is because the knight is guarding the weakness on d5. After we take and then queen takes, we're now going to lodge our knight on the weak d5 square, and our knight is going to be permanently placed on the d5 square. Now, there's a book that is called How to Reassess Your Chess by Jeremy Silman, and this is basically called good knight versus bad bishop. So all of the persons we're saying is a bishop better than is a knight better than a bishop. It actually depends on the position, and because of the weaknesses in black's position and the fact that the pawns are on dark squares and he has a dark squared bishop, and the knight is in an outpost on a light square, and the bishop is not able to challenge the knight, white is better in this position. I mean, the queen is going to go back. I mean, we could take the pawn if we're trying to win a pawn, but we can also play moves like f4 or h5 to continue with our attack. Now, here's the third position. It's white's turn to play. Let's evaluate. Now, just by evaluating the position, there's so many pieces around black's king. Black has no pawns around the king. Black's king is not safe at all. White's king, however, all the pawns are around white's king. With that being said, we're not going to be worrying about anything else because king safety is a main issue. Now we need to find our candidate moves. We need to look on moves on the opponent's half of the board. We need to start looking on our checks. With that being said, those are all our candidate moves. Now, if you have a lot of candidate moves, and this is where a lot of persons go wrong, it's not about seeing the candidate move and trying to choose which one of the candidate move is better. It's actually the opposite. It's about eliminating the candidate move that you don't like. And then eventually you'll find the right candidate move. And this is a very easy one, so I'm assuming that you guys found it. But the best move in this position, I mean, it's not knight d7 because the king goes here, and I'm not really seeing a lot of good follow-up checks. It's not knight takes h7 because he could run away with his king and the knight covers the square. It's not queen to g8 because the rook could take on g8. And even if we take here, the king has a lot of squares to go. With that being said, and it's also not taking the knight because the queen takes. The best move in this position is queen to f7 check. Even though it looks dubious and the knight guards the square, if it's a move on the opponent's half of the board, if it's a forcing move, you got to calculate that move. After the move, knight takes e7, knight to e6 is a checkmate. If you want to learn my full thinking system, watch this video.